I want to welcome everyone who's here. And before I screen share the slide deck, I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself before all of our faces disappear with the screen sharing. My name is Kate Piotrowski. I'm a Community Impact Officer here at the Hartford Foundation. This request for proposals info session is an RFP that sits in what we call our Civic and Resident Engagement portfolio. And joining us are my fellow team members that work within that portfolio. I just want to list their names so you can see their faces. And for some of you, you may know them. They may be your program officer for another grant. We have Sierra Stansel here. She's our Senior Community Impact Officer for our Civic and Resident Engagement work. We have Joanna Rendon Ledesma, another Community Impact Officer. And we also have Tiana Starks, a Community Impact Associate. So they're all here. I saw some waves. You're certainly welcome to connect with them as well in some of this work, especially if you have grants with them. I'm going to go ahead and screen share, and I'll ask if someone can let me know if they can see the PowerPoint. Let's see. Go ahead and screen share now. All right. Someone let me know if they can see that. Great. I see a thumbs up. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to take this time to go through the PowerPoint for our civic engagement and get out the vote request for proposals. So I will go through the presentation and share some information now, and then we'll spend the remaining time as basically a Q&A. You can ask questions related to the request for proposals as it may impact your proposal. So you are here for the info session for what is our civic engagement and get out the vote RFP. This is the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, which is the community foundation for the city of Hartford and the 28 surrounding towns. And we have recently released, as of February 1st, Get Out the Vote RFP with a primary goal to support voter registration and participation leading up to Hartford's mayoral election, which is on November 7th of this year, through nonpartisan Get Out the Vote activities. This request for proposals will fund up to $200,000 across all awarded organizations. That's the amount of money we have allocated to support these efforts. We'd like to share some proposal parameters and requirements, and keep in mind that most of this can be found within the RFP announcement on our website. We will be funding requests up to $25,000. Applicants must be either a registered 501c3 nonprofit themselves, or if they're a community group, you can apply using a fiscal sponsor that is a 501c3 information. And if you're unsure about how to do that, you can certainly connect with me offline and we can give you some insights on how that process would typically occur. Unless you're an organization serving as a fiscal sponsor for another request, we are asking that organization submit only one proposal to this RFP. And keep in mind that if you are an organization that has a relationship with the Hartford Foundation currently and is receiving what we call a core support grant, please contact either your program officer or me to discuss your eligibility around this request for proposals. If you aren't sure what a core support grant is, odds are you're probably in the clear. If you do know that you have a core support grant for which you're currently receiving funding, definitely check in with us before you go through the efforts of completing an application so we can ensure your eligibility. So for this request, we will fund Get Out the Vote activities that are nonpartisan only. Our IRS guidelines restrict 501c3 organizations from engaging in any sort of partisan activity or engagement. We listed examples of some nonpartisan activities in the RFP. This can include general civic education around election processes, helping residents register to vote and explaining the impact of their vote on a civic level, It could be activities that remove barriers to participating on election day. So, for example, perhaps providing transportation to polling centers, or hosting a candidate forum for all candidates on the ballot. There are additional resources on nonpartisan activities and approaches to remaining nonpartisan, even in dialogue and conversations throughout those activities, at the website linked here. It's also linked in the RFP. It's www.nonprofitvote.org. We also cannot legally support or fund any partisan activity, so we will definitely be looking at project proposals with a close eye for anything that may be partisan in nature. Anything that's partisan would be activities that actively support or oppose a candidate or a political party, or have an effect of doing so. So if you have questions on any of those activities, again, you can check that website, or you can check in directly with me as well, and we can discuss those as you're completing your application. The proposal should also address how you will engage with populations and neighborhoods within Hartford with documented and identified low voter turnout, or with low eligible voter registration. Also linked here and in the RFP announcement itself is a link to ctdata.org, where you can zoom in and get a sense of neighborhood level data in the city of Hartford regarding low or unregistered voters. In terms of the application, you will find a link both on our website under our grants opportunity page, as well as in the RFP announcement itself, to access the application. You'll be applying through our grants portal. If you have a recent grant with us, the chances are you already have someone in your organization that has an account in the portal. If you are new to us, you will have to create an account. There is one eligibility question prior to having the application released to you, and that eligibility question asks whether your proposal will serve Hartford residents through voter engagement activities leading up to the City of Hartford's 2023 mayoral election. Again, we are not supporting broad civic engagement activities during this time. We are supporting civic engagement and get out the vote activities specifically for Hartford's mayoral election this year. Please keep in mind that we will have another RFP next year. We will have a future grant opportunity to support the upcoming presidential elections. That is not something that we are supporting in this current RFP. To provide you some insight for the review period, we'll have a small team of community impact staff that will be reviewing the applications as a group. Most of that team is sitting here on this call, folks that I introduced to you earlier. We will be using a rubric as a starting point for discussion. I'll come back to that. The rubric is also available for viewing for transparency, so you have a sense of how we're beginning conversations, where we are focusing some of our decisions, and I'll return to that in a moment. We will not be accepting late applications. The deadline will be hard, it will be final. And that deadline is Monday, March 20th at 11:59 p.m. I would highly, highly suggest not waiting until the last minute, because depending on the delay with your clocks on your end on your computer versus with the system, if you're off by just a couple of minutes, or if something funky, an error occurs, you will be locked out of the application once you're past the deadline. So I strongly encourage you to submit it with plenty of time to account for any issues that may arise. For example, in previous RFPs, I've had organizations reach out that an issue happened with their attachments being too large when they went to submit, and that interfered with them being able to submit their application. So little things like that, will be difficult to avoid if you're at the 11th hour. So during that review period, we will eventually make an award announcement by early May 2023. You can begin your activities leading up to that award date all the way through election day. In terms of grant reporting, because this is a pretty narrow of request for proposals in terms of the activities we're seeking to support, the outcomes that we will ask you to report on should, in theory, also be straightforward. So we'll ask you to report on the following. The total number of Hartford residents engaged in your GOTV activities, the total number of Hartford residents who registered to vote through those activities, your populations reached. It could be particular neighborhoods, your existing program participants, perhaps it's a subgroup, a subcommunity, for example, folks with disabilities with limited access to, get to the polling centers, et cetera. And then we'll ask you to describe those strategies that you employed for engagement, which in theory would match up with what you are listing in your project proposal. It's not listed here, but odds are we will probably have a learning question. So things like what were your successes and challenges, learnings for moving forward with this sort of civic engagement work. General contact information for if you have questions pertaining about your eligibility or the project proposal that you're submitting itself, you can contact me. That is my email address. If you have general questions about the grant portal, any technical issues you're coming across, having to create a new username or glitches, what have you, you'll want to contact our grants administration team. And that their email address is grantsadministration@hfpg.org. I wanted to backtrack quickly, and I can pull it up if folks end up having specific questions about it. But I wanted to just touch base about the use of the rubric. Again, it's in the RFP document itself, and it's on our website listed under this RFP under the grants opportunities. The rubric, when you look at the different items that we use to measure and score, apart from, there's one question that is an eligibility factor. So it will ask if you are supporting basically the Hartford mayoral election for voter engagement, voter participation. That's the only eligibility question. And what I mean by that is the items that follow are not all or nothing, meaning if you score really low on one of those items, it does not inherently make you ineligible for funding consideration. It's for us to pull out factors of consideration for funding, and you may score low on some, but high on others. That does not, or vice versa, that does not inherently make you eligible or not. And so you're aware the numbers are really to help us anchor applications as we review them as a group. So helping us make sense of how some applications may compare to others and collectively within the group, the strength of the application. There is no score that is a cutoff that we will be using. So, if you're adding up numbers in your head and you think you need to reach a certain threshold in order to be considered eligible, please know that that is not occurring. The way that we use the rubric is, again, to anchor us in a conversation, a starting point, what I might call like a launching pad to help us review the project proposals that come in. And especially if we're not able to fund everything that comes in, being able to observe the particular strengths of certain applications. So I just want to keep that in mind. The rubric is meant to be a tool simply for transparency, and I never want it to be confusing for folks or have you have concerns that because maybe you score lower on some items, that inherently that puts you, that you'll somehow be immediately thrown out of the pile of review. We review all of the applications, we score all of the applications, and then we use that information as a conversation to make grant decisions. So I just wanted to share that all with you. And I think we are at the point where I am done speaking. I see that there may be something in the chat for me, but I will stop screen sharing just so that I can see you all, and we'll use the remainder of this time for you to ask any questions you may have.
Oh, I have the terrible about keeping it. Hoping the reason that I'm calling will give us a good excuse to say communication.
Oh, and I see what was in the chat was just Joanna popping in some links, which I so appreciate. Thank you.
No, that baby's not Adams. Really has been a long since we talked.
Kate, I had a question.
Oh, yes, please.
If the proposal is accepted, is the disbursement made at the time of the award, or is it at the time that you conclude the project? So are we getting the funds up front, or are you getting them in the rears after you submit your metrics?
Great question. You will get your awards upfront with your award letter. Hi, Adriana. I see you mentioned you came in late. You don't see the links to the chat. I will copy and paste. And I noticed there's also a question in the chat. Oh, thank you. Joanna's beating me to the punch. Elsa asks in the chat, is airing programs to get out the vote on Hartford Public Access Television an eligible activity? I'm grateful I have Sierra, who's our team lead, to answer questions if I'm not certain, but this is one where this is a type of marketing approach. It would be something that we would consider funding through this proposal.
Hi. So yeah, I mean, so it's once again everything in context, right? It sounds on its face, it sounds, you know, eligible, especially given the fact that Hartford Public Access is viewed for the most part by Hartford residents. So it does sound eligible. I guess the one thing that I will say about marketing approaches that don't necessarily feel like they can be contained in a way where it will get to the right sort of populations, that would also be taken into consideration throughout the review process. So like I said, on its face, it appears to be eligible, but you know, we look at everything in context.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We are currently in the process of we have completed a grant that dealt with an institute for youth in the area of social justice. And I'm wondering if we would be able to implement a part 2 of that with the Get Out the Vote. Would that be something like that be acceptable?
That's a great question. I think that might be a conversation that would have to be continued offline. Because of the nature of the RFP, we will only support activities related to voter participation and registration for the mayoral election. So if you are looking to couple that with other parts of your program or project, that might be something that is not funded within this RFP. That might be something that is funded through a different type of grant with us. So we can definitely talk and explore that option. It sort of also depends too on the timing of that, if it's better for you to apply to this RFP and then something separately. So it just sort of depends on the nature of how intertwined these activities will be, where the budget's actually going to be allocated to. That will determine whether or not that you would apply and get funding completely outside of this RFP, or only, or a little bit of both at some point. So I would encourage you, if you know your program officer, to connect with them. But we can also, if you want to send me an email, we can begin that conversation as well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? If not, you've made my job really easy today. Carol, do you have your hand raised?
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
I see the names of some people that are in organizations that I work with. And so I guess my question is, if there's cross-fertilization of activities, how is that addressed in your evaluation of proposals?
That's a good question. I think in many ways, a lot of our evaluation, there's parts about the programming, I should say the project, the access and existing work with the populations you intend to serve. So there's a lot of aspects about the organization and its programming and our understanding of their ability to engage with the populations that they're going to engage with through this grant. But on the other side, we're also looking at things like outcomes. So, you know, with the money that you are seeking, how many individuals do you plan to engage with? How many can you get to register to vote? So I would say, you know, if there's any collaborative efforts that are going on that can bolster your impact, or, you know, how you describe your impact, I would certainly spell that out in the project proposal. We do have a cap of $25,000 that you can seek. And so, you know, if you're seeking to collaborate efforts, but it limits your ability of how much you can ask, I think you'll need to sort through the project logistics and if it makes sense to apply separately or together based on the overlap. But I'm hoping I'm answering your question well. And if others on the team want to jump in, please do.
So I'll jump in. So it's, I mean, there's obviously because, you know, the foundation did this as kind of a cohort, there's sort of strength in numbers, and they're really, it isn't, I don't think it's anyone's intention to sort of look and say, oh, there's an oversaturation of, you know, folks in this area versus this area in that area. To Kate's point earlier, I think sometimes it's about looking across the landscape with regards to what's being proposed and saying, oh, okay, these folks may have more of an in here with certain like subgroups of people. But this RFP very clearly is targeted towards groups of folk. Well, it isn't necessarily the groups of folks that we're targeting, but people who haven't been registered to vote and or are registered and don't vote. And so the intention is one way or the other to try to get more folks engaged. And so we're not going to knock anybody down for what is considered an oversaturation in a space where historically it hasn't happened.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yes, Maureen.
Hello. I had one quick question, just to clarify on one of the questions on the application, where it says, what portion of your organization services benefits residents in the Hartford's 29 town region? And so as of right now, my organization, we've done, you know, national programs and local programs based on what election is happening. So if we were to win this grant, the entire program would obviously be benefiting just Hartford. But so to answer that question, would it be, you know, with just this money, or should it be accounting for all the work that we've done in the past as well?
Yeah, that tends to be a potentially confusing question on our application. So you asking it is not unusual at all. In that instance, we would want to know, typically speaking, what percentage of your organization services are within our 29 town region. We will, you know, of course, be looking at in the project description, you know, which neighborhoods you'll be focusing on within the city of Hartford, et cetera. But that question is actually asked at the organizational level, just for us to get a sense, especially if you're a newer org to us, a sense of where your work is primarily focused on. It's something that is part of a fuller picture that we get as we make decisions around which organizations are best positioned to do the work that we're looking for them to do. So certainly an organization that is totally out of our region, for example, probably not a good fit to expect them to be able to come in and engage with the residents of Hartford, right? So that's a really extreme example. I know that's not what you're saying is yours, but just to paint a picture of how that information gets used and how it's helpful. So yes, you would answer it you know, even if it's an estimate, I'm sure that's very difficult to get the exact amount. And it can be observed in a few different ways. But yeah, the percentage of your services as an organization benefiting our 29 town catchment area.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other questions? I promise I'll only hold you in an awkward silence, maybe 30 seconds longer. All right, well, with that said then, I think we'll end it here. If there's any lingering questions that you didn't think of now that you want to ask us, please do feel free to contact me. If you have questions pertaining to how to answer an application question, certainly feel free to reach out as well. We'd be happy to walk through how you can answer that and what we use that information for. With that said, thank you all so much for being here and expressing interest in this RFP. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Bye, everyone.